Okay, so for those just signing on, Christie is an award-winning advisor, speaker, author of the book Begin Boldly: How Women Can Reimagine Risk, Embrace Uncertainty, and Launch a Brilliant Career, which we'll be talking about today. She's a Rhodes Scholar who's been named by Thinkers 50 as one of the top management thinkers likely to shape the future of business. Her research and writing have been featured across publications like the Harvard Business Review, Forbes, Fortune, the European Business Review, Time, Fast Company, Business Insider, and more. She has spoken worldwide to organizations that include the World Economic Forum, Harvard Business School, University of Oxford, and the Global Women's Forum for the Economy and Society. Her corporate clients include Bacardi, Deloitte, PwC, HSBC, and more. And she currently serves on the Women's Leadership Board of the Women and Public Policy Program at Harvard Kennedy School. Christie, I am so excited that you are with us today. Welcome.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
So much of what we talk about at Jane is honoring the work of women and how undervalued our time is and how much space we hold for other folks and obligations in our lives. And so just want to recognize that being here with us is no small feat, and it is an honor. And I'm also very excited because I just ate this book right up. I just couldn't put it down, read it, kept reading it. And so I would love to sort of take it all the way back to the beginning to get the conversation started and just hear a little bit about the incredible journey that led you to this book, and the work that you do right now.
Yeah, it's been a long journey. So first of all, thank you so much. And thank you to the Jane Club for having me. It's just an honor to be here. And it's really, really amazing when I get to come into organizations and networks and communities that are so aligned with my work and my mission and the focus on women and empowering and equipping women. So I am absolutely thrilled to be here. So what I wanted to share, I guess, from the beginning is like, I've cared really about gender and women's issues for as long as I can remember. Like, I distinctly remember at around the age of 11, my drama teacher, pulling me aside and saying, would you like to try out for our public speaking team and debate team? And I said, sure. And she said, go home and prepare a 3-minute speech, right? And so the next day, everyone comes in and they talk about their vacation, their favorite extracurricular sport, their favorite ice cream, right? We're 11. And I had gone home, knocked on the rectory door of my Catholic church and interviewed my priest about why women couldn't be priests in the Catholic church, and ended up giving this like big debate at 11 on why I thought we should be able to be. So that's like my first memory of really caring about this. But I went on to go to eventually Brown University, and I did a lot of work on gender, sexuality, race, inclusion. And then you mentioned the Rhodes Scholar, and I was one of the first Rhodes Scholars to go to Oxford and study women's studies, which at the time was like, people were like, oh, she should be doing law or medicine. So no, that's absolutely fine. That's the technical world we live in.
I'm like, why does my phone do that to me?
It's all good. And so it really, for me, what I say was like, at the time, a lot of people when I was at Oxford were expecting me to do law. And this seemed something like, why would you do this? And what are you going to do with women's studies? And I wrote this article recently. It was just a little post about, I was always questioned, but now the state of the world where we are, like, I no longer have to qualify it. It's no longer questioned. And what used to be seen, I think, even when I was younger, as issues of our mother's generation, is now so clearly it's a mainstream issue. So I know in a lot of ways, we're coming here in a time where we're trying to be energetic and excited, but our bodies are still battlegrounds. There's so much going on from a rights perspective. I won't go into it because I'll get emotional, but ultimately the silver lining, I will say, is there is great awareness and so much momentum, and that this now is a mainstream issue. And for so long, it felt like it was a sideline issue. And now I never have to justify that. And why begin boldly? I mean, I really felt like women aspire to take risks, but have a hard time translating those aspirations into actions. So this whole book is about closing that gap.
I love that. And like, something else to unpack for us offline is like, I also was a women's studies major, and my journey to feminism definitely began with the conversation I had with my mom, where I was like, well, I want to be Pope when I grow up. And she was like, so some things I have to let you know. So I love it. I love it. And your own journey, you write in the book, includes, you said, playing it safe rather than playing it smart. And I'm curious, when we talk about risk and having a bold career and these sorts of things, what exactly is playing it safe? How might some of us here be playing it safe in ways we don't even realize are self-limiting, because you talked too about how the advice we receive is sort of to play it safe. And so what does playing it safe really mean for you as something we should not aspire to be doing?
Yeah, but you hit the nail on the head, which is sometimes it's unintentional. We don't even realize we're playing it safe. We don't even realize that we're shrinking, or holding less space. So one example of playing it safe is believing the narrative that we just need to keep our heads down and get the work done, and our work will eventually be recognized. Like, studies and research have shown that is not true. Like, you have to advocate for yourself and build a community like Jane, where you've got other advocates and people elevating you as well. Like, that is one thing. The other thing is, the way that our brain works, we're more likely to think about what is the worst case scenario outcome of making a bold move versus the best case scenario outcome. And so it's almost like our own bias, like, I don't know, it almost removes us from risk as much as possible. And so we almost have to counteract those things and really say, like, well, what is the best thing that could happen? What is the opportunity in front of me? Because we often limit ourselves before we even start. The other thing I see in terms of playing it safe is we aspire to do things, but we don't know how. And rather than figuring out how or finding something actionable, we just kind of get overwhelmed and give up. And that's another piece. The last thing I'll share is, like, women, we fall into what I call, and I talk about this a little bit in the book, I definitely did at certain times in my career, analysis paralysis, where we think that before we make a bold move, before we take on a risk, we need to analyze every single pro and con and look at all of that, when really we should probably err on the side of action and then analyze, rather than analyze then act. And the great researcher and professor at INSEAD, Herminia Ibarra, talks a lot about that. And I talk about it in my book, like taking a process and of experimentation in our lives. So we're constantly, and you'll know this from reading it, like risking, assessing rewards, what we've learned, refining our approaches, and repeating.
Definitely. And, I think what was interesting too was I see people in the chat saying, this is the story of my life. I too felt called out by all of this, because I'm like, that's me. Like, how many times have I been like, well, one day I'll be ready to do this. And when I feel ready, that's when I'll do it. And, of course, those moments they never come. That's a moving goalpost that never happens. And, I found it interesting how you talked about this idea of risk being defined in this male-dominated, masculine way, and the fact that women are they see themselves as risk averse because what they think of as risks are like huge, sort of blow up your life, big, major change things, but also that we tend to see risk as something that could turn us into failures because, of the way that we view ourselves. And so I'm curious, what are some of those different levels of risk? Like, when you talk about risk, what are some of the examples that you would offer to folks of, like, actually, this was a risk, or this is a risk you could take tomorrow? And, how do you reframe risk to be that strategic risk that you talk about in the book?
So first of all, I want to say that existing as a woman in the world today that we're in is a risk in and of itself. So any of us that are not defining ourselves as risk takers, I would actually say that given our gender and the current state of play, like, it is definitely something that we have to take on every day in ways we don't even realize. So anyway, separate and apart from that, so what I talk a little bit about in the book is that we traditionally think of risk as something that needs to be managed or mitigated or minimized, or, we try to steer clear of it. But I want us to reimagine risk as taking bold moves. And that could be in so many ways. It's not just in finance or entrepreneurship. It can be embedded in organizations. It could be, are you taking on stretch roles? Are you putting yourself up for high value, high visibility assignments? Are you having faith in your capability to take on something new and figure it out irrespective of the outcome? Are you advocating for yourself and others? Are you connecting with others and putting yourself out there networking? Are you using communication techniques to negotiate for your value and worth and your salary? Like, these are all risks that we can take, and we need to be really intentional about seeking them out. The other thing I talk about in the book is we often overestimate the impact of these big risks, right? Of like moving country, moving jobs, starting a business. But we don't just take one risk in life. Think of it as an investment portfolio, and that's our career. That's the example I use. We don't just take one big risk in our investment portfolio and let it sit. That's it. We want a continual investment of even little investments in our investment portfolio so we can see compounding returns. Our career, and we want a diversified portfolio. A career is no different, right? And so we underestimate the impact often of these smaller acts, but when taken in aggregate together, they can have an amazing impact. Using your voice more in meetings, offering to present to a client, leading a project, like these things that when taken in aggregate are so powerful in our careers.
I loved it. And, I think it was interesting, sort of this idea of redefining risk. And that was sort of a recurring theme too in the book, right? Like these things that we need to rename them. We need to adjust our definitions of
Yes.
them. And, I felt like there were these key words that kept popping up: flexibility, agility, adaptability, these ideas. And, you talked about the fact that women tend to view, it's like, we're not just afraid that the risk won't pan out. We're afraid that that means forever we'll be failures who tried to take a risk and didn't, and that'll be a permanent part of our identity. And so how do we, you talk about the inner game and the outer game. And so how do we start getting that inner game right to become more comfortable with risk, to become advocates for ourselves, and to recognize, that, like you said, everything is a risk for us. So why not be taking the risks that matter?
Yeah, it's so good. So yes, so anyone that knows the work of Carol Dweck knows the work on mindset, and that from a young age, boys are more likely to say, I got an F. That's data. Why did I get an F? I'm going to use it to improve, right? But women from a young age are more likely to say, I got an F, I am a failure. And what I call that is outcome identity conflation, right? So we are the outcome of whatever we just did, whatever risk we just took. But we really need to separate that. And so the model in the book of the risk, reward, refine, repeat, the refine phase is, am I going to let the outcome of this risk taking define me or refine me? And the whole purpose is we're constantly being refined throughout life. And if we're not being bold enough and facing those moments of refining ourselves, we're not going to live a rich existence. And so it's the idea that failure is not fatal. I need to stop that identity outcome conflation. And I need to use the outcomes of risk taking, good or bad, not to define me, but to refine me. And then the other piece, and I think you're hitting on this a little bit, is just our inner game. Well, I think risk taking is the most important skill set you can have in your career and life. Your inner game to get there is really compiled of like 3 mindsets. And it's the courageous mindset, the curious mindset, and the agile mindset. And it is really curiosity, courage, and agility that will fuel your risk-taking ability.
Well, and that's perfect lead in. I'm like, that was something that I wanted to ask you about next, was this, your assertion that we think what we need to take risks and to level up and to do what we want to do is confidence. That what we actually need to do is be courageous, and that courage can sort of fuel our confidence too. And so can you sort of speak a little bit to how we cultivate courage in our careers and sort of in ourselves?
Yes. And I also just wanted to say to this group, like, this for me has been one of the most powerful concepts with people I work with, is that to date, I believe we put so much focus on confidence and not enough on courage. And what I realized was when I was doing research with executives, they were saying, oh, the most important thing for women, the biggest gap we need to address is their confidence. But then when I went around the world and I was interviewing some of the most successful female executives and leaders, they showed up with self-doubt, fears. They were like, why are you interviewing me? I'm not sure this is it. And I'm like, well, you're just CEO of one of the world's top companies, right? And so I was like, wait, confidence isn't a prerequisite for success, because these amazing women weren't showing up confidently. And so I said, we're actually putting the focus in the wrong area. What they do, they don't show up confidently every day, but they show up courageously every day. So we always talk about cultivating confidence in girls and women. I would love to flip the script and say, stop focusing on confidence, try a little courage instead. And the reason why is if we wait until to feel confident before we make a bold move, you just mentioned, we'll be waiting forever. We will be waiting. Confidence, if I waited every single time to feel confident before writing my book, before getting up in front of thousands, before speaking to a group, then I would never put my voice into the world. But what I am is courageous in the absence of confidence. So if I can leave this group with one thing, it is don't wait to feel confident. Be courageous in the absence of confidence. And guess what? Confidence will be the byproduct or output of that.
And I feel like the really interesting thing too is that connection between curiosity and courage. Because, I mean, I felt very seen by the parts of the book where you talk about, how many times have I gone into a negotiation or had an excellent idea, but when I present that idea, all I've prepared for is for someone to say no to me. And so I'm already on the defensive with them. And you talk a lot about how our fears are the self-confidence that we think we don't have in that moment actually can be alleviated by just allowing ourselves to ask questions. And I would love to hear you talk a little bit more about the power of being curious and just being willing to ask questions, especially when so many of us are worried that asking questions makes us look needy or like we don't know anything,
Yeah, so it's a tool that I wish I learned earlier. And I share in the book that because I come from a debating public speaking background, I used to come into negotiations like guns blazing, defensive. This is my market value. This is all the data. Here's my background. Here's my rate. Here's the competing offers. And in a couple cases, it backfired for me. And I was like, what am I doing wrong? Like I'd studied negotiation, everything. And I had been told from the time I was young, from a teacher and a coach, that Christie, when you walk into a room, the way you talk has to counter what everyone's going to think about you. So lower your voice, don't ask questions, no upticks. And those are all like powerless forms of communication. But what I realized was questions are actually the most powerful. And they are the most powerful, especially for women, because they help us navigate the gender bind, where people might view a man as confident as us as aggressive or abrasive. By using questions strategically, you can address your own fears and also address the gender bind. So let me give you an example. When we go into networking situations, we often feel nervous, antsy, gross, yucky. It kind of feels sleazy. I've got to present myself like I'm trying to get something. It's horrible, right? But if you simply flip it and say, instead of focusing on what I want to say, preparing my elevator pitch, why don't I focus on what I want to ask, what I want to learn? What are the things that I want to know more about? The minute you change that and you focus on questions, you alleviate feelings of nerves around networking, and you'll have more meaningful discussions. You'll also be more likable and have a chance of a further conversation. Numerous research studies have done this. Those that ask more questions and follow-up questions, more likable, more chances of follow-up connections, all of that. So that's one really powerful tool. In negotiations, though, it's the same thing. If you come in and use questions and say, look, I've got some ideas. My intent is I'd love to stay with this company. I love the work. I'm feeling undervalued. I was thinking about this. I was really looking for a package that more accurately reflects this. I was wondering if we could try it this way. There's two options. Maybe we could try this or this in terms of structuring my time and my pay. Do you have any other ideas? What are your thoughts on the best options? Suddenly, you've used optionality and questions to really bring down the guard of the other person, get them engaged, and be more persuasive. And numerous studies, you probably have heard of Adam Grant out of Wharton. He did a TED Talk years ago, the research of Alison Fregal, who was looking at how women use this in negotiations in the workplace. And it was really powerful.
It really is. And I mean, it's like a total, I see like mind blown emojis in the chat. That's exactly how it feels to be like, oh, okay. Like instead of having all the answers, I'm allowed to have questions. It just feels like a whole new world has been opened up to me. And something that I also really loved about the book is that you share these sort of case studies and stories in which progress is not linear and people are fumbling, stumbling, making mistakes, misrepresenting themselves, taking like months off, having to sort of retreat before re-entering and trying again. And so I'm curious, we're in these, I feel like we've been in like a 2.5 year moment of flux and transition, and there's so much that's up in the air. And a lot of times right now, it feels like the ground is just not even beneath our feet, right? And so I'm curious, like how can we keep cultivating courage and curiosity and challenging ourselves to take risks, even when, things sort of feel unstable, things feel like they're shifting, and it might feel like the stakes are so high because we don't have anything to ground us right now. It's such like a moment of pivoting and transition. And so I'm curious, like, how does that carry through in those times?
I just think if you wait for the perfect time to risk, you'll never. And so I think, yes, we can talk about economic, political, social, health crisis, reckonings, environment, everything going on right now. But ultimately, we have to focus on what we can control. And in the book, I provide a model on how you can assess risks and decide whether they're worth making. And the S in this model, because it's an acronym, is around support. And the whole concept is like, I think the idea of being self-made, I don't say this in the book, but I think the idea of being self-made, so BS, because I think we're all interconnected. I think, and all of the amazing women that I've met, they're like, no woman's an island. Like someone somewhere has contributed to our journeys. And the idea with the S in the bold moves method is have a support network, have success advisors that are risk takers, have stakeholders, have a safety net, so that as you take these risks in an environment where it feels unstable, you're not going at it alone. So you're talking, and then if you fall and falter, you have someone to help you out. But if you do well, and then you're like, oh crap, how am I going to rise to the occasion when I feel so depleted and I feel so, everything's uncertain, you'll have someone to help you rise and get there. So it's really about doing that. And I also encourage you not to overinflate the idea of like, I need to take some bold, huge move, like I said. Like, think about what you can do each and every day to be a little bit bolder and a little bit braver. And it could be outside of your career. It could be like, oh, I'm going to take up something I've always been wanting to my whole life, but I've never invested in it because I was scared to do something new that I know I'm probably going to be pretty crap at. So there's so many different ways you can.
I love that. And, I was totally, as sort of a closing question, because I know we're coming up on time, I wanted to talk to you about this, the S for support. Obviously, we are big fans of women coming together to support each other here at Jane. And I'm curious, in a community like this, in our workplaces, in our social lives, can you speak a bit to almost what strategic support looks like? How can we strategically lean on our communities and our confidants? And why does it also matter that we figure out ways to strategically support other people in our careers to really like bring it full circle?
Yeah, so there's a whole chapter in the book on courageous advocacy because I'm so passionate about this. And I just think that we need to create a movement of supporting each other. And there's such tactical little things you can do. So I'm just going to give you a couple examples. Like one is you can support women in risk taking, right? That's obvious. I could say that. But the other thing is like little things. Like if I came on and introduced myself, because of the double bind, I'm likely to be viewed as competent but not likable. And so one way around that, because the state of play in this society that's tough, I hate that it's that way, but a way around that is introduce your female colleagues leading with their credentials. Other people should be tooting your horn. That will help you navigate that, right? Another way is amplification. The women in the Obama administration actually did this. Like, let's say Joe makes a comment in a meeting and it's actually just repeating what Carmen already said. And everyone's like, Joe, that's a great idea. You could say, actually, I think that's what Carmen was getting at. Could we go back? Or when someone gets interrupted, which we know happens all the time, being like, I'd actually like to hear the end of that, or building upon what Carmen just said, so we can amplify the voices of other women. And there's so many other tips and tricks that are so simple: introductions, amplification, making sure women are getting actionable feedback, and encouraging them to be bold and brave, Like just this book is not a book. I didn't write it to be, I wrote it to be a toolkit. I wrote it to be a method where you take it like a curriculum and you go out there, use it in your workplaces, have a book club, read a chapter a month, do the exercises at the end, and create a risk, reward, refine, repeat ritual so it becomes part of your culture.
For sure. And, on that closing note, when it comes to these tools, these methods, these are the stuff in this book is stuff that you've been refining yourself with your own clients and the work that you do. And so I'm curious if you can tell us just, some stories about ways that beginning to build bold careers has really shifted people's lives in other ways, right? How does it reverberate out when we all start to take more risks in our careers, advocate for ourselves, advocate for each other? What are some of the sort of larger transformations that you see in your clients?
So there are the personal transformations and it transforms them in and out of work. I just have seen people that used to come in small, fearful, I can't move jobs because of this and this, coming up with the, all relevant things, suddenly step into their best and brightest selves. And it's not that failure doesn't still happen. It's not like they get to an end point, but they know they have the tools to always figure it out, irrespective of outcome, which is so powerful. They're willing to take a chance on themselves. And then societally, this is one thing I wanted to say. When we are bold and make bold moves, we should be sharing those. We should be making those visible. We should be sharing them online in this community. You can tag me online and say, begin bold, you can whatever. And you know why? Is because studies show aspiration is directly linked to visibility. And that means you cannot be what you cannot see. So the more that we make bold moves and bold women visible, the more we're going to inspire so many other women to understand that they can do the same. And so that's one thing I'd say is continue to share that and continue to build a community of boldness so it has that ripple effect of actually telling them you cannot be what you cannot see, but you can see this and you can be this, you can be bolder.
Thank you so much, Christie. I'm like, what a mic drop. And to the folks tuning in, I am dropping a link in the chat right now to this book that I know everyone wants to run out and buy immediately. Begin Boldly. I'm like, it's always hard. There we go. Trying to get the full thing in there. Begin Boldly, How Women Can Reimagine Risk, Embrace Uncertainty, and Launch a Brilliant Career. Thank you so much, Christie, for being with us here today.
Thank you. Thank you for the rapid fire, engaging, interesting conversation. And I've been reading all the comments. Thank you all for your engagement and support. I'm so appreciative. You can find me on LinkedIn or Instagram or other platforms, and I'd love to connect.
Thank you.